Gino's East is one of Chicago's most famous deep dish pizza places. They've been open since 1966. And there are still some people who don't realize Gino's East is here in LA now too. And let me tell you, it feels like you're in Chicago when you're in there. I'm in there most every Friday, and it feels like home. Happy hours from 3 to 6, Monday through Thursday. Get $5 drinks like Stella and Dark Horse Chardonnay, and $6 eats like spinach artichoke dip, garlic breadsticks, and a jumbo bowl of fries. There's so much great stuff on the menu, I always have a difficult time deciding what to order at Gino's. My go-to is probably the tavern pizza, cheese and sausage. But when I see someone next to me eating a deep dish, my mouth starts to water. Then I see the Italian beef with giardiniera, and I want to snatch it from the waiter's tray. Gino's East of Chicago in Los Angeles was named Best Pizza in the Southland by LA Times readers 2 years in a row. It's more than just a Chicago restaurant. It's one of the best restaurants in LA. Check out the friendly confines of Gino's East, LA today, on the corner of Coldwater Canyon and Riverside Drive, just off the 101. See you there. Sit back and relax. It's time for peanuts, popcorn, and Cracker Jacks. Hey, how's it going? I'm your host, Jeff Santo. I'm here with my wife, Christy.
Hello, hello. So we got some mail.
We do.
From our last episode with Fergie Jenkins,
Yep.
We have someone, Howard Blair, he wrote us.
Howard.
And he says, great interview. My team was those 69 Cubs.
Mine too.
I was fortunate enough to meet a lot of the 69 Cubs at Fantasy Camp
Me
the
too.
year your dad passed away.
Oh.
You can see why they were all so special. Fergie is in a class by himself. I love the story of the horseback incident. Thank you for bringing back such great memories.
That's cool.
It's really cool.
Yeah, he was at the camp. My dad passed. Wow. Yeah. That was a nice camp. Yeah, it helped us a lot. Me and Ronnie went to it, and I think Linda came to the banquet. Yeah, she did.
Yeah.
You were there.
Yeah.
So that was nice.
And he also says here, have you ever interviewed Jose Cardinal?
Jose would be a tough interview. I'd love to interview Jose. He's got a deep Cuban accent, but he's had some health issues. And Eddie Vedder at the camp did a great impersonation of Jose. The way he's. I'm not even going to attempt to do it, but I'd love to have Jose. We're going to have a lot of great guests like Jose coming our way and continue the ones we've had already. Right?
Yeah, we like to go to once a week. So that's our goal, is to get to that
every
point.
Thursday.
So we just need more listeners. Come and bring them on. Tell one friend today. Tell one friend tomorrow. Just keep telling people about our podcast. It means so much. And we're so grateful for everyone out there listening. And
Yes,
we
we
just
are.
want to bring you the best show. And just, it just means the world to us.
Yeah, it's growing, and thank you for the support. And we're going to take it to the next level if we can. We started in our living room here, and it's great. And just love the conversations that we have with our guests and the journeys, going into the psychological journey. So expect more of that. And also, don't forget that we have, our Patreon stuff that we're going to be adding more stuff to too. Mm-hmm. Unique interviews with people around Wrigley or in entertainment, unique jobs, yeah.
Yeah, if you want to nominate somebody that you think would be right for that, go ahead and send us an email. We're open to suggestions. And
I'm looking for Don Young too to be on the podcast. I'd love to talk to Don Young. I have a friend working on that. He lives in Arizona, and I just love to.
Everybody has a story, and that's what's great about
it.
This podcast is just hearing the different stories from, the different ways of life and where they came from and the struggle and the triumphs and
how they got to where they got.
Yeah.
And what it took. It's pretty special. Yeah. So.
And this is a great episode.
Yeah, this episode, wow. The special guest, just some great stuff. Fascinating story with his father. Can't wait for you to hear it. And my crackerjack is a dear friend, part of our family when we grew up, the Pullanos. So another Pullano on there to talk, and it's the oldest one, so it's great. Can't wait for you guys to hear this.
He's got a lot of good stories. It's a long one. Feel free to pause and come back. Enjoy.
Enjoy. This podcast is brought to you by Bernie's Tap and Grill. It's family owned and operated since 1954. Located across from Wrigley Field on Clark and Waveland. My dad hit a few home runs on the Waveland Avenue, and Bernie's was my dad's favorite place to go. It's got delicious food, 4 full-service bars, an awesome beer garden, a sidewalk patio cafe, and a cool upstairs area. It's the place I've always met my friends at before and after games. Go on by and tell Linda Dillman Jeff Santo sent you. Bernie's Tap and Grill, where you go when you go to Wrigley.
Hail Hill Auctions is Chicago's premier partner in rocking your fundraising goals. We strategize everything from one-of-a-kind auction items to big-time sponsorship acquisitions. Hail Hill Auctions is your VIP, very important partner that you need to maximize your fundraising. Head over to hailhillauctions.com and be sure to tell them Santo sent you. Hail Hill Auctions, where money raised is love saved.
My special guest today had one of the most demanding jobs in Major League Baseball for 32 MLB seasons, 20 with the Cubs. His story is fascinating, starting with his father who survived the Bataan Death March in World War II. During his time with the Cubs, he formed a dear friendship with my father, and I got to know him pretty well myself when I traveled with the Cubs for this old Cub. Jimmy Bank, so good to have you on the show, man. It's been way too long.
I agree. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I will correct you on one thing. It was 34 years in baseball as the traveling secretary.
Wow. That is a long time, man. Holy cow. Now, I did some research on you because, you know, it's been a while since we talked, but I knew you had years and years, and just by the way you ran the show, it's such a difficult, demanding job. People don't know that, but we'll get into that. But just finding out the path from your father, my first question I have to ask you, when you were growing up, did you realize what your dad went through?
I did, because a lot of those soldiers from that era, they didn't talk about their experiences, but my dad did, and he spoke a lot, public, speeches and to civic clubs. And yes, I was aware, but now that I'm older, and I'm sure a lot of people go through this, I wish he was still here now that I'm more aware of what he went through, I guess. I wish I could talk to him about it and ask him questions about it.
Wow. Did you ever ask him any questions about it back in the day, Jimmy, or is that just something you just took in like we all do, really, from our fathers?
Yeah, I really didn't. Maybe occasionally I would ask him something, but no, because I was so aware of it, having grown up around it, And,
right.
But now that I'm older and have read stories about the experience, occasionally I have questions like just basically, how did you survive?
Right.
And
right.
Because any of your listeners, if you're not familiar with the Bataan Death March,
right,
you should look it up. It's just an amazing piece of history, unfortunately. Yep. But to answer your question, I would just like to ask him, how did you survive? So
that's in 33 months he survived. 33 months.
33 months prison camps. Yes.
Isn't that unbelievable? And that walk that they did was like 65 miles.
Correct.
And how many people dropped dead and were shot? It's amazing. They have the documentary on it too. It's to survive something like that and to come back and to see what your dad did with his life after that is quite amazing. It really is.
Well, thank you. I agree with you. I mean, I'm obviously a little prejudiced, but he was amazing. So,
I said Bataan. I always thought it was Bataan. How do you pronounce the Death March?
Well, it's both ways. I think the anglicized version is Bataan. Technically, a lot of people say Bataan. So
okay, yeah.
It's my southern accent.
No, that's that. You know it. So here's the thing too. What's interesting that you said that. The older you get, you think about it. And I have to say this: when my dad passed, the the more years that went on, I started to really like dive into the psychology of his journey, like going, how do you do it? Like, deeper than I did, obviously, when I was doing This Old Cub, right? And it's really helped me out a lot to really go back there and even the article that you sent me soon after he passed, that was like that. I think that triggered me. I think it was like a 1962 article in Baseball Digest or something that you sent me. And just to hear him talk at 22 was amazing to me. I just now to really dive deep. I'm putting a TV series together and Bonnie Hunt's attached and we're really deep into it, but me and Christy have put a lot of years into it. It's really the psychological journey of him. And it starts at 69 and goes back to his childhood because that was a time I want to take a moment that really kind of his character was pressed up against the wall with the Don Young incident that was kind of sensationalized, it was. But just to see how my dad and his character and how tough he was and how he was about integrity and all that, and then to fight that in the most important season of his life, and then to jump into his life and to see where he came from. His dad left him at 8. It's just amazing to me. And so when I read about your dad, I was just like, wow. That's like, it's got to live in you too, right?
Yeah, and I will tell you this, 2 things about your dad, which you just referenced. One, I would like, if we were in a hotel hallway, like if he's going to his room, and this is after he had lost both legs, I would sit there, I would stand there and watch him, and I would go, I'm watching a man with no legs walk down this hallway. And it would just amaze me. And I will tell you this, and I've said this for years, your dad's the second toughest man I ever met, my dad being the first.
Yeah.
And wow. So I've thought about that a lot over the years.
Yeah, and his whole journey, really, with the diabetes and just thinking about it when he was young, knowing that, like, he's going to rookie camp just after he signed a contract. His mom has him get a physical, and then to say, oh, you got diabetes, he's like, what the heck is? To know that you're going out there with a ticking time bomb and waiting for it to explode and still get there. And that is, there's something really dynamic about it. And you know him, and just thinking about your dad, man, wow, you survived something like that. Then you must think, okay, life, every moment in life going forward, I have to embrace. I have to be the best I can be. I have to get the best out of me and the people around me, I would think, right?
Yep. Yeah. And he did. He
did. Yeah. Let's talk about the journey, because his journey, melds into your journey. And he got started with a radio show that he did for Alabama football. Talk about that.
Well, what he did was, when he came back from the war, he was in hospital for quite a long time. And then when he came back to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, he ended up in the radio business. He was managing a radio station that had just started. And because of his connection, he knew Coach Bryant, Coach Paul Bear Bryant from Alabama. He knew him in high school and then went to college with him, and they were friends. And when he came back with the radio station, after a few years, he actually ended up starting the Alabama Football Network and basketball a couple of years later. And so that was his start into the sports world through broadcasting. And
wow.
So he had that network for a long time, and he traveled with the team for years. I think at one point over about 20 or 30 years or something, he had missed 2 or 3 games, I think.
Holy cow, man. So you grew up like in his world. Like I grew up with my dad. Like you probably spent a lot of time around all that. Am I correct?
You are correct. And my friends know, and I think you can identify with this a little bit. I grew up in the press box. And he used to take me to the games when I was a little kid, and we'd sit in the press box, and now it sounds funny, but my friends know I don't like sitting out in the stands. It's not arrogance. It's just what I'm comfortable with.
Right.
Because working in baseball, of course, I was never just really sitting in the stands. And but yes, I grew up around the Alabama athletic department quite a bit, hanging out a lot. And then as I became older, I'd work on the network some in the press box.
Yeah, and I read that did you announce too? Did you do some play-by-play?
For basketball, I did analysis, pregame, postgame, halftime, and then comments during the game. For basketball, for about 2.5 years.
Okay.
And and then on the football network, I sort of grew up spotting and doing stats for the announcers, and so
right.
I was just around it all the time.
Right, and so you got into becoming into MLB. Like, tell me that transition, because you met a lot of famous guys that you were around. I mean, Red Grange, your dad knew, Dizzy Dean. You talked about Bear Bryant, and then Charlie Finley is from your home area, right?
Yeah. Jeff, you've done some research. The thing with Mr. Finley, with Charlie Finley, I wanted to work in sports, and he owned the Oakland A's and an NHL team, the California Golden Seals, and a team in the old American Basketball Association, the Memphis TAMS, TAMS. And I actually went to see Paul Bryant Jr. had worked for Charles Finley in the minor leagues for a couple of years. And I went to see him and talk to him, and he actually picked up the phone and called Mr. Finley for me. And then Mr. Finley said, "Send me a resume." So I sent him a resume, and then I ended up calling him and went and interviewed with him in Chicago. That's where his office was. He worked out of Chicago. And he hired me for the basketball team. And so I worked there for a year in Memphis. And then, unbeknownst to me at the time, he was trying to sell the basketball team. So at the end of the basketball season, he asked me if I wanted to go to Oakland to work with the Oakland A. I thought it was just going to be like open the season, and then come back and work basketball. And, they had won the World Series the year before. So I went out to Oakland and showed up to work on opening day and ended up being there for 4 years.
What now? You go to Oakland. They just won the World Series. Then they win 2 more when you're there, 73, 74. So 73, what was the job that you got there?
Well, he started me out. He had just gained the rights to his own promotions as far as concessions, not Coke, but souvenirs and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So he had me just working with that. And it was, and I mean, I was young and would do anything. And, I'd unload a truck every now and then. They showed up with boxes of promotion items and stuff. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I can go down to the docks and work on the docks and get $15 an hour doing this, So about halfway through the season, the public relations director left, and he made me the temporary public relations director for a few weeks, and then he brought out his PR director from Memphis. And I worked with him, and then all of a sudden the traveling secretary resigned. And Mr. Finley called me one day, and he said, "How would you like to be the traveling secretary?" And this was like in July.
Holy cow.
And I'm thinking, well, sure, I'd like to do that. And I didn't know the guy had left, had quit. And anyway, long story short, he hired me as traveling secretary, and 3 days later we left on a 2-week road trip.
Oh, my God. How did you even know what to do? I mean, first of all, you're with a World Series championship team taking over, right? I mean, wow. What right place, right time. I'd say that, right? So you did it. So how did you acclimate to the job? Did you know much about it? And tell us what the job entails to people that don't understand what it is, because it's huge.
All right. A traveling secretary I liken it to like a road manager for a really large rock band. Mm-hmm. And you babysit. If you have to, you bail them out of jail. Mm-hmm. All the arrangements on the road, bus, truck, airplanes, whatever, trains. And handling all their needs on the road. Now, over the years, it's changed a little bit, Jeff, or it's changed quite a bit, actually. But back then, it was the only front office person that traveled with the baseball team. And if you look at team pictures from back in that era, there's usually one person that's not in some kind of uniform. That's the traveling secretary. And so he just, back then especially, or even today, you go everywhere with the team and you take care of needs and arrangements and try to keep them happy and try to keep their mind on baseball.
Yeah, and supply tickets to their families and everyone that asks for them, too. And
exactly.
And it goes on, right? So how did you, when you first started there, did you know the job a little bit? Like, did you follow someone before, the guy before that? Did you watch his job? Like, how did you fall into it so quickly?
Well, after a month or two of working there, I remember asking Mr. Finley's secretary, I said, the name of the traveling secretary was Tom Corwin. I said, what's Tom Corwin do? She goes, he's the traveling secretary. And I said, what's he do? And she sort of told me a little bit, and I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool, you know. And so it's, well, he's been here and he's connected with Mr. Finley's family. And I'm like, okay. So when he told me, he asked me if I wanted to be the traveling secretary. He goes, well, go down and see Tom Corwin and talk to him. So Tom gave me about a 2-day, 3-day crash course. And he told me, he said, I'll meet you at the airport on the first leg and fly with you to the first city. I went, okay. Well, he never showed up. And I was on my own, but I had a pitching coach, Wes Stock, a longtime pitching coach in the big leagues and former player, who took me under his wing and really, really helped me out. And, of course, being a current world champion and soon to be a second world champion, there was a lot more attention. And, you know, Mr. Finley being somewhat of a controversial owner, and there was a lot going on. And then, lo and behold, 3 months later, not only are we in the World Series again, but we're in the World Series in New York, of all places.
Right.
And you know what? I was 23 years old.
Holy moly.
Youngest in Major League history. I'm 23 years old, and I'm traveling with these guys, and I'm like, are you kidding me?
That is crazy. See, people, they look at like, oh, when you say like you're 23 as a traveling secretary, a lot of people don't know the job, and the ones that do go, how did that happen, right? Because that's the same as a GM as far as I'm concerned in having responsibility, right? There's a lot to do that could go wrong, right? And so I also look like they say, oh, look at how young Theo was as a general manager, and he was. But now you see, at 23, you're a traveling secretary. Because I remember when my dad played, you know, Blake Colin was the guy, right? And he's the man. And, like, he's the only one around the Cubs. Yeah, like you said, you think what is he? Is he the owner? Is he the GM? Because you think that. You're like, he's always around. But knowing a little bit about him and reading up on him, too, did you know Blake at all?
I did. Mm-hmm.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Wow. He seemed like a guy that, like, a lot like you, just came from an environment, like, knew he could fit in, like, because of where he came from. And I didn't know that about you until now. I did the research, but it all makes sense. What'd you think of Blake?
Oh, Blake was great. Blake was always really calm and cool, you know?
Yeah,
I mean,
right?
Now, keep in mind, I was in the American League for years, so I wasn't around him that much, really just mostly in spring training, because I always trained in Arizona. But Blake, I will say this, was always nice to me, just always really nice to me. Older, you know, and, you know, there were a lot of people in baseball, you know, like, oh, man, who's this young whippersnapper kind of thing, you know? He doesn't know what he's doing, you know, but Blake was always really nice and cool. So I do remember him.
He had that presence, right? And like you just said, he had what rock band was he touring with, right? 'Cause you almost feel that, like that kind of charisma. So you're 23 getting that job. Now, when did you feel like, okay, I got this thing?
I'm not sure I ever really reached that point, even at the very end. Because, you know what? I've told people it was something new every day, and most traveling secretaries will tell you we learn something new all the time. And there was you can plan, but a lot of times there's changes in the way things are done or whatever, and you can't. You can put it on cruise control, but you better have your foot on the brake sometimes too. So
yeah, watching the job, like when I travel with you guys for this old Cub, it's just you're constant. So, like, when do you get a break to even at 23 to form a relationship, to have a family? Right?
It's tough, and I tell people a lot of times. Young people come, hey, talk to me about baseball. Tell me I want to work in baseball. And one of the things I tell them is you have to understand it's rough for a family, man. It's not easy. And I think all of the traveling secretaries in the world will tell you, you're away from home a lot. Now, I met my wife in spring training in Arizona.
There you go. Okay.
And she, and she was around when we were dating some when I was with Oakland, and she sort of knew what the world was like at that point as far as my world. And I will say this, and you know this as well as what I do, what I'm about to say, Jeff. I have two sons, and I missed a lot, but my kids got to do things that other kids in America would kill to do, that never could do. And
absolutely,
there was a trade-off sort of that, they were able to experience things that were just fantastic that they wouldn't have been able to do if they'd been in a different job.
Yep. And you're like a ball player. You're gone just as much as a ball player's gone. You're committed just as much to, maybe even more, because they can go home and relax. You really couldn't at times.
Right. Exactly.
Because you're getting a call about something going on for the next day. There's something to do in that job all the time, whether it's tickets, a hotel room went wrong, or someone's, like you said, getting crazy at a bar. Oh my God, I got to go help this person now. So, I mean, you were everything: the medic, the fire department, the cop, the the father, the psychologist. So
now, let me interrupt you real quick, because your dad one time, okay, and I assume all of your listeners know about a lot of his health issues.
Yep.
He called me one morning. He was having a health issue, and we're in a hotel room. Yeah, I mean, in a hotel. And I went, Ron, do you need a trainer? And he goes, yeah. So I get the trainer to him, blah, blah, blah. So later that night, I see him at the ballpark. He's 100% okay. And I go, Ron, at 8 o'clock this morning, you feel like you're on your deathbed. You don't feel well. You're not. Why did you call me instead of a doctor or an ambulance or a trainer? Jimmy, you're a traveling secretary. I knew you'd get it done.
You're the producer of the movie, man. You get it done. Who am I supposed to call? So that's awesome, man. Now, from Oakland. Now, how long did you stay in Oakland?
I was in Oakland for 4 years.
Okay.
73, 4, 5, and 6. And the team was breaking up, and he was trading players, selling players. Players were leaving as free agents and everything. And so I left. And I actually came back to Alabama for 6 years. And I guess, for want of a better way of putting it, missed baseball. It sort of gets into your blood a little bit.
Yeah, right.
And I missed it and started making overtures to get back in, interviewed with a few teams. And all of a sudden, the Milwaukee Brewers had an opening for traveling secretary in early February. Now, could there be a worse time, to not have a traveling secretary? And I had already sent them a resume and had some people, some former players that they knew that were in Milwaukee were on there. Anyway, ended up interviewing with them and went there for 10 years in Milwaukee.
Wow. And 10 years. So in Milwaukee, how'd you like living in Wisconsin, going from Alabama to Wisconsin?
Other than the cold, it was great. Milwaukee's just an overgrown little town, sort of,
right.
And we liked Milwaukee a lot. And So one of my kids still lives in Wisconsin. He loves it up there. And, but I do not.
Yeah.
Every year as I became a little bit older, each year the winters became less favorable to me. So
Yeah, same thing with Chicago in the winters. When you get older, it's different than when you're younger. Yeah, that's brutal, and it's not as brutal as much anymore. But boy, there were some brutal winters in Chicago, and for sure Wisconsin. Now you go from there, then you go to the Cubs. How did you get to the Cubs?
Well, I had left Milwaukee.
Mm-hmm.
I asked my wife, I said, can I quit baseball? And she goes, well, I let you back in 10 years ago, so I guess I can let you quit. And I'm like, yeah. So I resigned from the Brewers, and I said, it's time to go get a real life. And
how old are you? Real life, how old are you at this time?
Oh, I was in my 30s.
30s, you're still young. Yeah. You've just
no, I was early 40s. Yeah, I was early 40s. And so I was done, and then did thrift work for the Cubs, was an assistant to the general manager, and Sid and I had been together in Oakland and stayed friends. And he called me, he said, hey, I saw in the transactions you resigned. This was like in August, which, by the way, I'll tell you, along those lines, people are probably going, why'd you leave in August? So I went in to see Bud Selig, was the owner of the Brewers, and I went in to see him, and he goes, well, you're leaving me at a really bad time. And I went, Mr. Selig, point to any day on the calendar, and I can tell you why it's a bad time for a traveling secretary to leave. and he didn't say anything. So Sid called me, and I said, nope, Sid, I'm not interested. I'm done with baseball. He said they were going to have an opening there because their traveling secretary was going to another team.
Okay.
And I said, nope, I'm done. I'm not interested. And then over the next day or two, nobody was beating down my door to offer me jobs. So I called Sid back and talked to him, and I thought, you know what? I'll go to Chicago for 5 years and then, like I said, go get a real life. And ended up going down, interviewing, and was there for 20 years. And by the way, never moved from Milwaukee. Stayed in Milwaukee.
That's right. That's right. Unbelievable. Now, what made you want to get out? Was that an emotional decision that you were just tired and exhausted, and then you got right back in again? What was that about?
It was a couple of things. Couple of things that happened at the Brewers that I just wasn't happy with. You know, no matter what business you're in, things. You know.
Yeah, of course.
You know, the family aspect that we talked about a few minutes ago, and I don't know, it's just time, and so I thought
time for a change. Time for a change is what you're saying. Like, yeah.
And,
okay.
But like I said too, I thought, okay, I'll go to Chicago for 5 years. You know, so but once again, it just sort of gets in your system. It's what you do, and you just do it. And you know, it's like, Jeff, I asked my kids one time, they had to be in junior high, probably middle school or something. I said, would you guys have rather had me with a 9-to-5 job somewhere Monday through Friday and home every day and every night? You know, and they go, one of them goes, I don't know. We've never had that.
Good answer.
I mean, so they were able to have fun and do things and meet people that were pretty cool.
You know, no doubt. And when so you got to the Cubs, what year was that you came to the Cubs?
October of 92. So for the 93 season.
Okay, so my dad was broadcasting. What was your first encounter with my father? Do you remember?
I'm guessing. I don't remember anything specific, but it had to be spring training, I imagine.
All right. Oh, you're new secretary. Can you give me some tickets for my family?
You know what? Actually, I had met him before, though, at an old timers game in Milwaukee when I was there.
Was that the one? Was that? Do you know that we went when I was in Chicago? We went to an old timers game in Milwaukee, and we drove up there, and I went with them, and I go, Dad, the stadium's empty. What the hell? Oh, well, they're just getting here. We go, we park, we walk in, and go, it's a night game. Oh my God, Dad! And so I said, what are we going to do now? He says, we're going to go back home. And we're going to come back at night? Yeah. All right. So I know it's around that time, one of those games. But, yeah, tell me about that.
Well, I remember going in their clubhouse after their old-timers game to see a couple of guys that I probably knew or something. And don't ask me why, but I have a vivid memory of your dad sitting there, and it's sort of the classic Ron Santo post-game. He's sitting at a locker. You know, he's got his head, he's sort of leaning over, and he's sweating like a horse and disheveled, you know. And I don't know why, but I remember that, Jeff. I just remember seeing him like. And
from an old-timers game.
Yep, yeah. I think you knew your dad well enough to know it could be an old-timers game. It could be a neighborhood softball game. He's going to play as hard as he can.
Yes. You know, it's probably that game, too. It was probably that game, man. I'm serious. Because I don't know how many old-timers games he went to Milwaukee at, right? And I know that one. And I remember when we got out of the parking lot when no one was there, I'm like, Dad, these winding highways, we're gonna have a hard time. And, you know, and I remember there was a guy like selling papers or something on the side. He rolled down the window and he said, so how do I get here to get back to Chicago? He says to the guy, right? and the guy slowest talk. Well, what you want to do here, sir, is you go over there, take a right, then you take a left, and you take a left and right, and then center, and then away you go. And my dad just looks at him like, okay, away we go. And we just, and he just took a right-hand turn, and somehow we found the right way. But was that not him, though? I mean,
yeah.
Always like, there's always something going on, man.
Trust me, Jeff, like on the team bus, you know, going somewhere, if we weren't going the same way he wanted to go, he would ask us, hey, why are we going this way? How are they supposed to turn right up? I'm like, I hear that all the time.
Oh, driving him during the time? I'm telling you, that shortcut he had, like, once we get off of Irving Park, we got to go through Berteau and through a church. You know, if I didn't make the wrong where you going? Wrong way. I'm like, Jesus, calm down. So, yeah, it was a nightmare driving with him when the Cubs lost. That's for sure, too, right?
You know, all right, another quick anecdote with your dad. So when we went to San Francisco, occasionally we would actually fly into Oakland and then bus over to San Francisco.
Mm.
So on the itinerary one day, he sees this 2 days for the trip. He sees we're flying to Oakland. Why are we flying to Oakland? Ronnie, it'll take the same amount of time because of whatever time of day it was. We'll be at the hotel at the same time as if we fly into San Francisco. He must ask me 2 or 3 more times before we get on the plane. So when we land, it's like, why are we landing in Oakland? Ronnie, I've told you, it's not going to take any longer. So then we're about 3 or 4 blocks from the hotel in San Francisco, and you knew my relationship with your dad that I used to do things like this. He goes, oh, there's the hotel. Oh, that wasn't bad. So about another block, I go, hey, Ronnie, don't you feel bad now about getting on me for 3 days about landing in Oakland? I just apologized. I just said I saw the hotel. I just said it wasn't bad getting over here. Why do you have to start it up with me again?
Right. Oh, so him. That's great. How did you live in Wisconsin, though? How'd you do that? Like, did you just get a place in Chicago until you said, okay, I'm going to go home one night?
I would go home a lot, but, like, I'd either get a hotel room. I had arrangements with a couple of hotels there, or I would stay with friends. When Chip Terry was the TV announcer, Chip always had an apartment that, and his family wasn't always there, but, you know, he had a couple of kids or 3 or 4 kids, and but he would let me stay at his apartment. A couple of other friends would let me just crash at their apartment if I needed to, you know.
Wow.
And I would commute too a lot. So
you did live out of your suitcase, man. I mean,
yeah.
Talk about breaking down that job. I mean, you are everywhere at once. So during your time, you said 36 years, correct?
34.
34. Oh, I just gave you 2 more. I gave you 2 less. Now I gave you 2 more. Okay, 34. So were there anyone that you had a real hard time dealing with, like over and over again? I know you can't name names, but how did you get through?
Well, there were some players that were, for one of better, let's just call them jerks, that were hard on me or whatever, but sure, but you just deal with it. And then, but the other thing is, some of the jerks, other players would get on him. Hey, man, why are you getting on him? He's just doing his job. They would stand up for me. And, of course. And without naming names, I actually, worse than players, I had a couple of managers that were pretty rough on me.
Wow.
And but you just do your job and keep going. But here's the thing: the good guys, for want of a better term, totally outweigh the jerks. And I think
absolutely.
17 or 18 managers in the big leagues, and I think 4 of them were pretty rough on me. The rest of them treated me unbelievable. Just treated me great.
That's kind of it in life, right? When you go into certain, there's going to be those 3 or 4. They're always going to be around somewhere. Yeah, it's just through a course of something like that. But you're right. The good always outweighs the bad when you're in an environment like that where it's mainly good, because what's going on there is exciting, right? What the hell, you're playing baseball. Let's be real here. This is, only a few get here. My God. So, and that's the one thing I got to say about my dad. He always appreciated having the life he had. You know what I mean? Always. And it's just great to see guys like that. And both of them were that way in his era, It was just different,
I don't need to tell you, but I'll tell your listeners, your dad was great with me. I mean, we had so much fun together over the years, and I tell people now, he was on the road. If we ever had a night off or after a day game, he was always my dinner partner.
Yep.
And
so he had fun, man. He was that way. There's no doubt. And me and you had fun. I loved hanging out with you when we could,
Yeah, we did.
We did. So, I got to say, like, out of the job, what's the hardest thing of a traveling secretary's job?
Very simple.
Okay.
Relying on other people to make me look good. Hotel people, bus drivers. If that bus doesn't show up on time, it's my fault.
Right.
And it's like, I remember I had a coach one time. It's like, why in the bus here? You screwed up. I'm like, do you really think I didn't tell that bus to be here? It sounds very trite to say that, but it does. If there's something wrong at the hotel, it's my fault. That's the simple way of putting it. What's the toughest part of the job? It's just relying on all these other people to make me look good or make a traveling secretary look good.
And what do you do? How do you do that? Just you befriend them right away so they get to know who you are? Yeah.
Yeah. The first natural instinct for a lot of traveling secretaries, including me, is if something didn't go right, you start getting mad at the person, you yell at the hotel person or whatever. And I learned early on, if you're nice to them, they're nice to you. And I really, really was good to hotel people and bus drivers and airplane people.
Wow,
and
great.
You know what? It paid off, because I had hotel people telling me sometimes, hey, I'm going to do this for you, but don't tell other traveling secretaries, that kind of thing. Yeah, and I'm sure other traveling secretaries get the same treatment from their people,
Right.
And so you just learn how to do it, I guess, is one way of putting it. So, and when I started out, though, the demands weren't there. You didn't have the players making the big money that wanted more and more back then, and your traveling party was much smaller. When I left, my last year, Jeff, was 2012, and a large traveling party would be in September when you call players up, and it might be 52, 53 people in the traveling party.
Mm-hmm.
Now, guys tell me the standard traveling parties are anywhere from 65 to 85.
Holy cow. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. Was there a part of the job that I always saw, when you were in the middle of it, and I could see, like, even going to the locker room and boom, everyone's coming to you. It just in the clubhouse. I'm just like, wow. But you never got upset. You were calm and cool all the time. I'm like, and so did you get that exterior because you learned quickly about it, that it could ruin things for you?
Yeah. And, but when I walked out of the clubhouse, I'd go back to my office and break down and cry. Yeah. No, I'm kidding. No, the other thing is there's one word a player you just don't use with a player, and that's no. You just learn to get things done. Whatever they say, you just learn to get done. And to answer your question, I just learned the players are there. Your job is to keep them happy so they concentrate on baseball. So you just accommodate them the best you can. It takes a little while to realize it. But again, when I started, the demands weren't there like they were over the years.
Yeah.
They increased.
They increased while you were there. Like, you actually went through a period of, really the transition then into the analytics part of it too, and all that. More people involved. So yeah, you went through a lot of the transition, and now it seems like it's even going to another place since you left.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yep. And one thing you mentioned, and you said something about what was the tough part. Traveling with a high-profile team like the Cubs is a lot different than traveling with the Brewers. And I don't mean that as a slight on the Brewers, because I love to say
right.
But the Cubs, as you're aware, are very high-profile. So the demands are there a little more, but especially tickets. And, the team only gets X number of tickets to dole out to the players. Well, then you have a player's in his hometown and needs 25 tickets. What about the other players? Then you get a star player or a veteran player who's like, I need 25 tickets all in the family section. So that means I'm moving another, like a rookie player's family into the friends section. And then he's mad at me, So that was a game that I had to play with the Cubs a lot because there was a high ticket demand for the Cubs, home and road.
Yeah, makes sense. Now, what was the job today? Is it the same as the job you had, or do they have more people helping out the traveling secretary?
My understanding, for the most part, it's just the traveling secretary, although I've seen where some guys have a little more help. Now, on some clubs, the traveling secretary is also the home clubhouse manager and equipment manager. So he has help doing both jobs, sort of.
Okay.
And I never really watched Seinfeld TV show. And one day my kids are yelling, "Dad, come here, come here, come here." And I went in, they went, "Look, on Seinfeld," they go, "George is the assistant to the traveling secretary." And I went, "Oh, no." And they're like, "What's wrong?" I'm like, "My phone's going to be ringing off the hook tomorrow with people wanting to be the assistant to the traveling secretary, and there's no such thing." So,
right. I remember that. That was great. Yeah.
But here's the other thing, too. It's like, I typed up my own rooming list. I typed up, now, of course, on computers, but I typed up my own itineraries and everything. Because if there's a mistake, I can't say to a player or a manager, "Oh, well, I was getting help from somebody and they did it." They don't want to hear that. It's my responsibility.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, I think there's one club, somebody told me they actually have 2 traveling secretaries sharing the duty. So I don't know. I think it's become so overwhelming. I know one club told a prospective traveling secretary, said, "Well, your job is to be a 24-hour concierge."
Wow.
So it's changed a lot. And, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm sort of really glad I'm not there now because it's different.
Right. Well, it's different, but you did it all, and it makes sense that you wanted to do it all because you're responsible for it all, no matter what. So that makes sense, but that's a lot of work. That's a lot of time. unless you trust someone to be able to do that with you. And you never had that because you just had your own way. I get that. Wow.
Yeah.
Now, what a time. Now you're out of it, Jimmy. What's it like? Do you miss it? How do you feel right now about the game and everything? Big question.
Right. Well, it's a 2 or 3 part answer.
It is.
One, I miss, being in that job. I had friends all around the country, so I miss my friends, and I miss my favorite restaurant. I don't miss the job, the work. And that being said, Jeff, I don't go to any baseball games. I've watched. I've been gone in 12 years. I bet you I've watched maybe 5 innings of baseball on TV. I don't follow it. I usually have to call my son and go, "Hey, who's in the World Series this year or something?" Really. I mean, last year he called me about. He lives in Phoenix, and he was asking me. He was saying, "Hey, how about the Diamondbacks? What they're doing this year?" And I'm like, "What are they doing?" And he told me, and I went, "Oh, well, who's in the playoffs with them?" He told me. That's how closely I follow it. Now, I'll see a headline, and if I see something either off the field or a perfect game or a no-hitter or something, I might read the story, But
yeah,
I don't follow it at all. And just so you know, I've had other guys tell me, traveling secretaries, they say, "Man, when I leave the game, I'll never go to another baseball game ever."
Wow.
And
wow.
Friends here, they're like, "Hey, let's go to a game." I'm like, "No, I don't care about going." And they go, "Why?" Well, I've been to 7,000 baseball games in my life. I just really don't care.
I'm done going to the carnival.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, basically, yeah. I mean, because it was a carnival for you, the way you had to. Now, that part of that is kind of like sad, I guess. But then it's like, no. How do you fill that void? Because you were so busy. It's not really filling the void. What is it that you have to fill when you leave a job like that, all consuming?
I told somebody yesterday, we were talking about cell phones. My cell phones calls went from 4,000 a minute to about 1 call a day. 4,000 a month to 1 call a day. And my emails dropped from like 400 a day to 10, Yeah. But I will say this. I stay busy now, but I'm doing things I want to do or things for me and the family. But I'm not bored by any means. And
right.
So
you put in your time. You did. Yeah, you did. Exactly. A job you loved because there was so much there. But again, it's such a demanding, relentless job that I can see that. I can see, getting away from it. I got to say this: when my dad retired from baseball, I can remember. To me, like he needed baseball in his life because that was everything, right? That's how
absolutely
he got up in the morning when he was a kid, and his dad left him and said, "Well, I'm going to be a ball player." That was his dream, right? That was everything. And I remember when he got out of baseball because he went to the White Sox, and that was kind of an emotional decision he made because they were going to trade him. Then they didn't want to trade him. He said, "No, you want to trade me? So trade me," kind of thing. But I'm staying in Chicago, kind of thing. And I feel like there were dark times there after he retired. As far as you could just see, until he got back into it, announcing, was he back where he needed to be, right? Those years that he was outside of it. And that's when I'm like, God, thank God he got back in. Because it's different for a guy like him versus someone like you. And again, you did it at a young age, but there was just something with my dad that he had to be back,
I understand that.
Yeah, and it's strange. Like, why isn't that in something in your case? But you can sense it. There's just a different journey to where you got, right? And I can understand it. But I think there was a while there he got pissed off at baseball too, just kind of turned his back on it. Like he didn't go to games. I don't know if he watched any games. He didn't like really going down to the park that much. And then he's like, what am I doing? I still got a second half here that I could do. So Yeah, I always think about his journey because now I'm 60 now. I'm like, damn. I remember my dad was 60. I remember 59, right? He had that heart attack at 59 on the road.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that?
Yeah. Oh, in Colorado. Very well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very well.
Yeah.
Jeff, within a couple of days after I left, I'm like, I'm done. That's good. Okay, move on.
Yeah, I can see that. I understand it. Are you writing a book?
Oh man, you're. Let me hold on. Let me look at the count. You're the 1,232nd.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I got to ask, man, because it's
that told me to do it.
Quite a. I asked you if you're writing a book. I didn't tell you to do it. So
no, I'm not talented enough to write it myself. I would need a ghostwriter. I've talked to some people. I'm leaning on it. I was with a baseball historian person recently, and she heard a couple of stories and stuff, and she's like, Jimmy, you have to write a book. End of discussion. You have to. And so I need to find a good writer. I've talked to a couple, and right now I'm in the middle of some things here that I'm working on. Once I get this stuff done out of the way, then I might try to talk to a writer or two and see what they say. So
I hope you do. I hope you do, Jimmy, because I think you got a wonderful story there, starting with your father, obviously, and kind of like a Moneyball book. I really do.
Yeah.
In a traveling secretary universe, but still, you got a lot there, man. Boy, let me know when it's done. I'd love to get the option for Hollywood. Okay, so just keep me in mind for that.
I will. I was talking to a former player. There's a reunion of the 74 A's next month, and I'm going, and I was talking to one of the players the other day, and we were just talking about sort of what you just said. I said, yeah, it's sort of almost been like a Forrest Gump kind of life, was around things. And,
right.
So, and I think about it more now. When I was working, I didn't have time to think. So,
yeah. And just to, we were talking, like, that's kind of like you say, like, I can understand you when you were done, you were done. And then it's like, stay away from the circus because, let it go and let me think about talking about the circus down the road. And wherever you tell that story from, it's got to be you right now. You know what I mean? And going back.
Right.
And that's a beautiful tale. You did have a Forrest Gump kind of journey. You were off. It's just boom, there you go. You got swept up in it young, really young. It's amazing that you held on. So because most people aren't smart enough to hold on to something like that. And then to put it down and come back. Pretty amazing.
Yeah,
so
it is.
It is.
And just think of the stories, Jeff, that you don't know.
I know that, right? Oh, absolutely, right. So you gotta almost like fictionalize some stuff. You gotta, there's gotta be ways that you're gonna pull that off. But yeah, don't hold back, man, because that's a time that's long gone now. Yeah,
I'm gonna give you one quick anecdote, and I thought this might be the opener to my book. So Joe Namath, who I think you've heard of.
I think so.
I knew Joe when I was 12, 13 years old. He played here at Alabama.
Yep.
And after he became a pro, he opened a restaurant called Bachelor's 3, and he had one here in Tuscaloosa. So I'm a senior in college, I guess, and I'm sitting with him out at the restaurant, and there's a couple of people at the table with us, and he's passing around his Super Bowl ring. And, the oohs and ahs were unbelievable. And I'm sitting next to him, and I have the ring, and I start to hand it to him, and I pull it back, and I look at it, and I remember this like it was yesterday. I looked at him, I went, Joe, just, I'll never have one of these because I'm not an athlete. And I hand it back to him. 2 years later, I'm wearing a World Series ring.
Never say never, right?
I know.
There's the theme in there. Wow. That's awesome. You got two of them. Yeah. Thought maybe you'd get one with the Cubs.
I thought it was pretty easy, Jeff. The first 2 years, we win it all.
Yeah,
right.
And then you went to Milwaukee and Chicago.
Yeah.
So, oh man. One last thing I want to ask you.
Yeah.
Okay. Your dad. You said you wanted to ask him how did he survive. How do you think he survived?
Sense of humor. He was tough. He was a good athlete and in good shape when he went off to war. And I think it was just, I'm not going to let these guys kill me. I'm not going to let these guys beat me. But he had there was one book out that there was a story in there that was pretty funny and that he told the story and there were people saying, hey, he had a great sense of humor, and I think that kept him going. And so he just wasn't going to quit. And like I said, he was tough. I mean, he was tough physically.
Tough though. That's tough in like, I mean, talk about the mental fortitude to just go, okay, I really got to go deep here. And, I mean, that's quite amazing, man. And you got that, that's part of you. So, you got that toughness, man. And, I start to feel that now. Like, I didn't become my dad. Obviously, you grow up differently than your father grew up. I mean, you know that 100%, right? You don't have that kind of hardtail they really had, right? But you have the hardness in a kind of different way. And your kids probably have their own difficult paths that they got to get through. It's all relative in a way at the end. But I got to say, man, that what he did, there's just something that we go to that we have. A lot of us don't realize, that we do have this toughness until we get through a lot of the journey and go, I can say to 60, God, I got through some things. I wondered how I got through it. And, and it has a lot to do because I think I got part of my dad in me. And, I know I do. And you obviously do too. Do you think about that?
I'm not saying this just because I'm on the phone with you or in your podcast, but yes, I've known you for a long time. You're a pretty tough son of a gun yourself. So you have a lot of your dad in you. So, and it's like I mentioned at the start, I ask any of your listeners to go look up Bataan Death March, BATAAN, Bataan Death March. And there's several great books out there about it. I'm not plugging. I don't get. I have no. But there's one book that was number one on the New York Times list for a long time called Ghost Soldiers, and it's about how these 500 of these prisoners were rescued from a prison camp. And it's the greatest military rescue in history, and
Ghost soldiers,
120 volunteer soldiers, Rangers, Army Rangers that volunteered for it, went 30 miles behind enemy lines to get these guys out of the prison camp and had to get them back 30 miles. And half of them couldn't walk. My dad was sort of blind and weighed about 100 pounds, I think. It's unbelievable to read that book. You think you're reading a Hollywood story, a script. It's not. Yeah. It's real. So,
I just got, while you telling me, I just got chills. It just, wow. It's amazing, man. And, I got to think, Jimmy, when you go through a difficult time and the job that you had, how to pull it off, you probably in those tough moments go, my dad did it. How can I can do it? Right. I mean, look what he did. I think I could survive a couple of irate players and managers.
I did that when I was a fraternity pledge back in the day when they were hazing us. I go, if my dad went through what he went through, I can survive this for a semester.
Right. Totally. Oh, man. So good talking to you, Jimmy.
You too.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. I've enjoyed it. And
me too, man.
So I'm here for you anytime.
Thank you, man. And I don't know if you ever get out to California. If you do, please call me. Okay.
You might regret that.
I will drop everything and just come and have a beer with you. Okay.
I appreciate that.
And I'll do the same if I get to Alabama too, man.
Yeah.
I will.
Please.
I will.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right, Jimmy. Talk to you soon, pal. Great talk.
All righty. Bye.
Okay. See you, pal.
This Santo moment is brought to you by Onesti Entertainment. In 1964, at age 24, and in his fourth Major League Baseball season, Ron Santo led the league in on-base percentage at .398, led in triples with 13, and in walks with 86, while hitting .313 with 30 home runs and 114 runs batted in. And he also earned his first Gold Glove for his superior performance at third base. That Santoid was brought to you by Onesti Entertainment.
Crackerjack.
Fire Prizes, Arthur Pullano.
Arthur
Hello?
Pullano. Arthur Pullano, Jeff Santo, you are my crackerjack.
You're kidding me. I am so excited. How are you, pal?
Hey, man, it's been a while.
Can you hear me? I have my
what are you in a tunnel?
earbuds on.
Get your phone.
You know what? Let me take these off. I have my earbuds on. Let me take them off. Hold on.
Oh, you got your earbuds on. You use earbuds? Those things are impossible.
You know those? Yeah. Well, I use them only when I go to work out. But I just got done, and I still had them on, and that's how I answer the phone. I just have them on because my daughter lives close to my grandchildren, and in case there's an emergency. Because when I work out, I don't really like to answer my phone. But how you doing, pal?
Yeah, good, man. Oh, God, it's been a while, buddy. I just got so much to talk to you about. My first question, Arthur, when was the first time you met my dad? Your dad met my dad, and when you met him too?
Okay, and you have to remember, I'm going to be 70 in a couple months.
Wow.
I have the most vivid memories of our relationship, but my recollection is my father was very active in an organization called Villa Scalabrini. All the Italians, early 60s, and your dad, my dad was a basketball, and somehow he made contact with your father. Now, I think it was through the Matarices when your mother and father lived in Elmwood Park.
Right.
And he knew Joe. And so Joe put him in contact with your father, and my father said, I have a charity event, and I'd like you to be the guest of honor. And your father said, sure, your father was a rookie. What did he know? He came from Seattle. He's in Chicago. Right. He's meeting all these people. And so my father drove, picked up your father, went to the banquet, and they didn't come home for 30 years, the two of them.
Right.
I didn't see him for 30. I didn't see him for 30 years. They were out and about. But that's how, if I recall correctly, and some of those, again, my memories are very, very strong, but some of them may have been a little off, but I'm almost 99.9% sure that that's how they met.
Yeah, no doubt. I remember my dad telling me, hearing the story that I even read an old article about it, it might have been 1965 or something, Baseball Digest, that how he met your dad. And my dad was actually, there was a promoter, like, really kind of using my dad, bringing him around town to these bad autograph signings, and started even criticizing my dad after ball games. Like, Ron, you didn't have too good of a game. He's like, what the hell, man?
Yeah,
who the hell are you?
I bet he received that well. I bet he received that well.
Yeah, and your dad came along and then said, all right, I guess my dad said, I got this guy. He said, don't worry, I'll help you get rid of him. And then that was the start of the relationship.
Yeah, I do know that it got strong real quick. I mean, the passion and the love they had for each other was without question. It was unchallenged.
No doubt, man. And I look at the Pullanos, you guys, man, as like my older brothers, and you're the oldest of the bunch, and so you have the biggest memories because you were the first one to kind of see everything. And you guys were always in my life as a kid. Like, I mean,
and
so
vice
versa.
I mean,
yeah,
vice versa. I mean, the benefits that I had from my family being involved with the Santos are immeasurable. I mean, it's just immeasurable. And I thought everybody grew up that way, But I was sadly mistaken, and very fortunate that I did grow up that way because, your father was wonderful to me. I'll tell you some stories if you want me to go into them about some of the things that we did and some of the things that happened to me that just don't happen to normal children when I was very, very young. It was remarkable.
Right. Yeah. And it was, it just seemed like an extended family, you guys. And then there were, the other Pullano family, Jimmy Pullano, Louis, then the Vanellis, and then also the Mayers, Ron Mayer, the Matarisi. So it was just an extended family, but you guys were, your dad and my dad were best friends. And let's talk about, like, when did you first meet my dad? Do you remember that as a kid?
I remember that my father brought him to the house. And, you have to remember, in 1960, I was 6 years old. And their relationship started very early. So I was a young kid. And I didn't really, the magnitude of who this man was, and actually who my father was, didn't really sink in on me. I sort of took it for granted because out of ignorance, I just didn't know. I didn't know what I was dealing with. I mean, this was like, and eventually, Mick Jagger, Paul McCartney, and your father could have walked in the room later on in our relationship. I wouldn't pay any attention to the two other guys. It was just your dad. I mean, that's just the way it was. But you know what? I want to say something before we get started, if that's okay.
Sure.
Let's not lose track of the fact that Mary Louise and Judy, your mother and my mother, played a pivotal role in what transpired between our families throughout those years. And quite frankly, without them, the magic wouldn't exist. It just wouldn't have existed. There was no question in my mind and the love that they had for each other. When I would go see my mother when she got bad with dementia and stuff, and I'd sit there, and every time we'd go, we'd call your mother, and I'd go 3 times a week. All my brothers went too, and they lived closer, but I'd go 3 times a week, and my mother cherished the conversations she would have with Judy because it was special. And to this day, I mean, I just talked to your mother Friday. She called me. We talk. I'm going to say once every 6 or 7 weeks. It's wonderful, just wonderful.
Yeah, and we're talking today. Today is Mother's Day. Today is Mother's Day.
Yep.
So I just want so that's great that you bring that up. And before we get into you meeting my dad, I do want to talk about your mom and my mom a little bit. And Mary Louise to me was just. I mean, they had such a strong bond. It was like having another mother, and it's like 2 mothers, really, right? And so, and your dad too. I just remember going to your house all the time. Your dad sitting in that recliner in the corner, and your mom just always gracious, always strong, always. The feeling was just amazing, right? Both of them, and we always had fun. We always laughed, right? So
I've never.
Our moms had personality too. Yeah.
Powerful personalities, powerful.
Yeah.
My father used to say, I'm not afraid of anybody but one person, and that's your mother. It was that simple. I'm not afraid of anything or anybody except your mother.
Right, man.
And believe me, your father echoed the same sentiments. It was that simple.
Well, they had to do a lot, man. You guys, you had, at the time, four boys, and you guys full of testosterone. And then
5 of us.
Well, I know, but to start, right? Four,
there was 2 different generations. There was 2
different generations. So the 4, I'm talking about the 4 that I grew up underneath. That's why, and obviously Eugene and Ann. So, but it was me and Ronnie. So we were always attracted to you guys because
you guys were like little pets. I mean, you were so much fun, and you guys were so mischievous, and with the slightest suggestion. We would turn you guys loose and just watch what you guys. Your brother Ronnie should be doing time. He should still be doing time.
Oh my God!
But what he did, he was brutal. What he did to some of the mascots at the games. It was criminal.
You're talking about when my dad went to the White Sox with the Holy Cow guy. Oh God! Yeah, that Holy Cow used to walk around, and we used to set traps for him. We used to have those strings that were like invisible and trip the guy, poor guy.
Tripwires.
Yeah, tripwires on him. Yeah.
Yeah. Ronnie was brutal, man. He was just,
he
was a
you guys, though,
bad kid.
Tell me about when you did first meet my dad, though. You had to be like 6, 7, and then talk
I had
about
to be 6 or 7 years old, and
Okay.
and again, all I knew was it was a good-looking guy. He was both my father and your father were big men, and then when you're 6 years old, they were imposing, and I just remember saying, well, this guy's just as big as my father, and this is going to be a lot of fun, and it was. I remember that when we were very young, that we used to spend a lot of time going to the place in Park Ridge, holidays. It was wonderful. It was just, and it was close. It was close.
Yeah. You talking about our house in Park Ridge or the pizza place?
Yeah. Well, both.
Yeah.
The pizza place. The pizza place was a wonderful nucleus to meet. Now, a lot of stuff was going on with it. You know, when they had Pro's Pizza, and it was Bob Hicks and all those guys. Louis Benelli obviously played a pivotal role. But I can remember, could I go off on some stories? Could I do that?
Yeah. What do you mean, can you do that? Of course. Of course. When did the pizza place start?
So,
I really don't know the year that started.
It was on Northwest Highway. It was right down the block from your house. But then my father and Louis and your father came up with the idea, well, let's start selling these things in Major League Baseball parks. And obviously they started at Wrigley Field. And so Louis Benelli came up with a recipe, and somehow they ended up with a manufacturing plant, a food processing plant in Kankakee. So we go out there, we being Beckert was there, Ron was there, my dad, Louis Benelli, Bob Hicks, I think Tony Trovato. Remember all those guys?
Oh, of course.
They were all there with aprons on. Your dad with pasta sauce and sausage and pepperoni, and we were making these small little pizzas and putting them in the freezer. Yeah, for Wrigley Field. Cousin Jay and I were the only kids there because we were the oldest in our families. We got locked in the freezer for 3 hours. We almost frozen to death. Your father and my father forgot all about it. I'm serious. Jay and I are pounded. You can't hear anything because and we didn't know where the hell we were at. All we know is we were 2 hours or an hour and a half from Chicago, but we're with all these guys making all these pizzas. It was a riot. It was an absolute riot.
Man, isn't that crazy? That was the first time that pizzas ever went into the ballpark at Wrigley, and I think any ballpark. And then you guys were doing it in Kankakee.
And shipping them out.
Wow.
They used to bring them to the pizza, your father's pizzeria, Ron Santo's Pizza, on Northwest Highway, and put them in a freezer there, and
then ship them to Wrigley with ovens.
Yeah, and then when they'd run out in the middle of the game, Rocky G and Petro would get in the car, drive from Wrigley Field out to Park Ridge, pick up more pizzas, and bring them back to Wrigley. Remember Rocky G and Petro?
Yeah, what a small, like, that operation seems so difficult, right?
Yeah, well, it was just you went from playing third base and second base, Beckert, for the Cubs to a food processing plant in Kankakee to make pizzas. I mean, these guys, I think my father, I know my father went with your father to P.K. Wrigley on Michigan Avenue and negotiated the first $100,000 contract for a Cub. It was your dad, my dad, and Wrigley. Just the three of them. And that was the first time. Again, I got to be fact checked here. I'm not embellishing.
Right.
But I'm almost positive that that's the first Cub that signed a contract for six figures. And my father,
I think he was.
Your father, and Wrigley.
Right. And I think before that it was always one-on-one with John Holland. You remember John Holland, right?
Sure.
The general manager, yeah. Where my dad would always have a hard time with those contracts. So finally, he got your dad involved at the end. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And my dad delivered some pizzas at times too.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah. But that was more for a dog and pony show, so people could say, Ron Santo actually delivered the pizza to my house. I mean, that got press, that got play. And your dad wasn't above doing that stuff.
No, not at all.
He loved the photo op. Yeah, he was humble in that way.
Yeah.
And he worked the deal.
Yeah. And tell me about times like my dad. You said at one time, I remember that he would pick you and Billy up to go to the games. Talk about that. Like, well, that was before me and Ron even kind of went down there.
Yeah, not so. What would happen more often than not is because my mother there was 4 boys, five years apart, and we were idiots. And so when my mother needed a break, your mother would tell him, on your way, and it was 9 o'clock he would leave, on your way, go pick up the boys at Mary Louise's house and bring them with you to Wrigley Field. Jeffy, back then, my dad had, remember, my father had the box seats on third base right by your father?
Right.
And they used to send us the tickets for the season. It was 8 seats. It was a bushel full of tickets. You got all the tickets. They were printed in hard copy, and you got them sent to your house. And so your father would pick us up, and we'd go and we'd shag batting practice until they opened the gates to the general public. They'd throw us in our seats. My father would come from the Insurance Exchange building on Jackson Boulevard and meet us there. He wouldn't come for the opening pitch, but he'd get there by the third or fourth inning, and we'd spend all day there. But what would happen, Jeffy, was, and it's a sensitive subject, but when your father was in trouble, he came to live with us in the basement of our house.
Yeah, I remember.
And he used to, this is when he had the Corvette. When he got a vet, my father got a vet. My father got a Cadillac, he got a Cadillac. I mean, they were Butch and Sundance. And so now I'm young, and he's got the vet, and he's at our house, and he's coming up to go to Wrigley Field, and he'd say, Arthur, come on, you're coming with me. So I would go, and I would drive. It would just be me, and I would drive, and I'd go down with him, watch the game. My father wouldn't come to some of those games, so he would have to take me back to the house on the way back. Do you remember, Jeffy, when he used to stop at the guy's house on Bertha? On the way home, he used to also,
yes. He would also stop at a bar. But go ahead, tell that story about the guy.
No, this wasn't a bar. He would go. Right. It was a street that would run directly west, right from Clark Street. So we go north on Clark, about 3 blocks past Irving. He'd make a left. It was a side street, and he'd go and you'd hit stop signs. You'd hit Ashland. Well, before you hit Western, this guy, Ron, your father would pull up. I'd be in the passenger seat. The guy would lean in, pass me, hand your dad a beer, and they'd talk for a little, and then we'd keep going. We'd go to Western Avenue, go back south to Irving, and then get on the expressway. That's how it would just be the two of us in the vet. It was like a dream came true. Man. It was absolutely marvelous.
You know, when you talk about like he stayed at your house for a while in the basement, let's talk about that. Was when I was very young, because I do remember my mom and dad got separated for a bit there. My dad was going through a tough time. That's after Kenny Hubbs died. And then that year he had a real good year because he focused to put all his focus on baseball because of Kenny. And then he had so that was a time that me and Ronnie went to Yakima with my mom for like a year. And then they straightened it out. But he stayed with you guys. And talk about that. He stayed in your basement?
Okay, he stayed in the basement. Now, we had a nice house. Let's not kid ourselves.
Yeah,
we grew up as kids. I want to revert back to one thing. I still, to this day, and I give you credit for it every time I utilize it, you have one of the most famous phrases in the world. I peaked when I was 12 years old. We didn't realize how good we had it when we were growing up. We were certainly spoiled. We were all good kids, but we were terribly spoiled. Terribly spoiled.
Well, spoiled to a way of like let's not spoiled like the way, when you say spoiled, we still though got it handed to us. You know what I mean? No one could get out. We knew the kid. We had strong fathers. We were scared of them if shit went wrong. So of course, at the same time, I wouldn't call it spoiled in the way of, we had a good life though, man.
We had a hell of a lot more than most.
Of course, but our life was a different life. That's the part that you don't realize.
The one thing I would tell people is all of us, you brothers, your brother and your sister, and my 4 brothers, and we were always grateful. Never lost track of the fact that what we had was a gift and earned by our parents. But so now your father. So let's go back to your father. Father's living in the basement, and this is when he'd come up. We'd go. He had the vet out front. He said, "You're coming with me." Now I was the oldest, and he couldn't take all of us. So now, back and forth. So now it's the All-Star game. I forget. There were a bunch of All-Star games clustered together. I think Cincinnati, Houston, I think Washington, Detroit, all close flights. And so your father, perennial All-Star, makes the All-Star team.
Right.
Now back then, you didn't take limos anywhere. You took a yellow a cab to O'Hare, got on the plane, went, you played, got back on the plane, came back that night, took the cab back. There was no limo. And so he would take the cab back to our house, and it would be, I'm going to say, midnight by the time he got home. I think he played in Cincinnati. And he should have actually been, I have to look up the stats. I didn't bother to do that. But he went 2 for 3. You know, back then, those guys played almost the whole game. They didn't substitute a lot. They played over, and he came back, and we were all waiting for him. You know, watched him on TV, you know, and now he comes back. Louis Benelli's got the pizzas. We're all sitting there eating, and he's exhausted. So we eat, we talk for a little bit. So he goes now, he said he's downstairs, and Billy and I were terrible. And we were terrible. He's walking down. I said, Ron, I said, listen, you've been here all summer. I said, you just played baseball with Ernie Banks, Willie Stargell, and Willie Mays. I said, Hank Aaron, don't you think, now you're going downstairs to sleep in my basement. Don't you think you should start looking for an apartment? He came running up the stairs, and Billy was giving it to him, too. He came running up the stairs. I deadbolted the door. Not that would have stopped him. He would have come right through. He would have fractured it like it wasn't even. But he was just playing the game. But I said, you know, you need to start looking for an apartment. I was about 10 years old. It was so funny.
Wow, man, but those were the times, right? And, you know, you talk about, like, you grew up, you didn't know different. Well, Ronnie and I didn't either. That was our life, right? So yours, too. I didn't think about it like that. Yeah, and Michael and Billy and Ricky, and it was like for us, that life when baseball ended for him, that's when you realize, whoa, that was a different world we lived in, you know. And then, you know, when my mom and dad eventually got, you know, separated, and, you know, then you lose sight, you lose touch with the closeness. We still all stayed close, but what revolved in the first 12 years of my life was really something special. There's no doubt about it.
What crystallized, well, I'll tell you a story of what crystallized it for me. When I was in business, and this has got to be, I'm going to say in the late 90s, early 2000s, your dad was, you know, in the broadcast booth, and I had won on a silent auction, a skybox at Wrigley Field. And I'll tell you exactly when it was, because it was September 10th, 2001. Mm-hmm. And so I'm there. Now, I made a concerted effort never to ask your brother, your mother, you, and I think you can attest to this, or your father, get me tickets. Can you get me tickets for this? I benefited so much for the stuff that your father and your mother did for me that I would never dare to ask them for a favor because they did too much already. So I'm going, and I had guys that never believed that we had this relationship with this guy because he was larger than life, especially in Chicago, but nationwide. And so I got these tickets, and I'm taking a bunch of people that I've known for a while. And one guy, I won't mention his name, but one guy, come on, I've asked you to get me an autograph. I can get you an autograph. I asked you, I don't do that. I don't do that. So now we're at the game, and we're walking up to our box, and here comes your father, and he sees me. I didn't see him. He sees me. Arthur, he gives me a hug. What are you doing? I said, I got a skybox. He says, listen, work your way up the beginning of the 7th inning. Go up this aisle, up this walkway, ask this Andy Frayne usher, tell him you're here to see me, and I'll have you come in the booth. This guy, the guy who didn't believe I knew your father the way I knew him, looked at me and said, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry that I doubted you. And then I said, okay, smart, you're coming with me now because I don't think you'll actually believe unless you're sitting. You come with me to the booth because your father said I could bring one guy.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. It was
and
huge.
Did he get his autograph? I hope he did.
Yeah. But we used to have, Jeffrey, I would say it was chest high. And there were 24 in a case, if I'm not mistaken, of autographed baseballs from the Cubs in our garage that my dad had all the time so he could hand them out as perks to people that he did business with.
Yeah.
We'd go through them in 2 months. We'd use them for fast pitching. My father would say, what the hell happened to all the balls? We'd take them to Shabona Park, And people would sit there and say, "What's all this right?" I said, "Oh, those are just Cubs. Just ignore those. That's all the Cubs autographs." You gotta be kidding.
Is that crazy?
No, yeah.
That's so funny you say that, because I found a Sandy Koufax ball I had. It's so worn out because we were playing with it. I'm like, I remember Sandy Koufax signing it for me. He was a broadcaster after he retired. And I was on the field, and I got a ball from him. My dad said, "Hey, yes, get Sandy's autograph." And I did. And that ball, you could barely see his name anymore.
Yeah.
You know? So what I want to talk with you about is how you were the oldest of the family, right? We went through a serious time with the death threats after the Don Young game, and it continued in 1970. Talk about that time, because I had nightmares of those death threats, thinking I was going to get kidnapped. But talk about how you got sent to our house. Tell that story.
My mother, and I was a big kid, but I was young. What year was that, Jeffy? Do you remember?
Yeah, 69 and 70. It was the end of 69.
So when he was clicking his heels, weren't they after him for clicking the heels? So everybody.
It was Don Young. It was everything that culminated, but started with Don Young. Yeah, the Don Young game.
So
sensational.
So your father's going out of town, and it had peaked. The threats were coming fast and furious, and they had the perimeter of Valley Low, the house in Valley Low. There was a SWAT team around there. I mean, they had the black cars, and you could see the engine lights on, but there were cops all over the place. But my mother said, "You go stay, because Judy's and the kids are all by themselves. You go stay." And I would go, and I would sleep next to the sliding glass door that led out to the backyard, out to the lake. And I'd stay there. I lay there, and I had a baseball bat. I had one of your father's baseball bat, and I was a light sleeper, so I wasn't. But all of a sudden, I stayed there, I think 3 nights, and I think the second night it dawned on me. Wait a second, there's like 20 cops out there. If these guys, if whoever coming after Ron breaches the perimeter of this law enforcement, what chance do I have against these guys? I'm gonna get killed. The only thing I can do is scream help and swing the bat at him. But I mean, it was real. It was real.
Yeah.
Because you didn't know. That's when you realized, we're surrounded by a lot of crazy people.
Tell me, your dad would always, kind of protect my dad from a lot of the haters that were out there. You call them haters today, but back in the day, I don't know what they called them, but the ones that wanted to get on my dad for whatever reasons. Talk about how your dad helped out in those areas.
Well, first of all, they were envious people for obvious reasons. I mean, who wouldn't want to be Ron Santo? Everybody was envious. But we go back to either people loved him with a passion or hated him with the same passion. And a lot of these people wanted to extract their pound of flesh. They wanted a piece of him. And I don't care. There's a lot of crazy people out there. And they're at spring play. I don't know. You're probably too young to. Well, we've made a couple trips.
Oh God, no! I remember those trips. I remember you guys were there. Absolutely, yeah.
We were all. I mean, there'd be Frankie Mariani was there, and Chuck Kowalski, and the Benellis, and so my father would go to every game. We didn't go to the games. We were just there to hang around the swimming pool and drink Cokes and hang by the beach. We didn't. I go to enough games. What do I want to go to a baseball game for? But so my dad's in the stand. My dad would drive your father to the game. Your mother did go. My mother didn't go. And so the boys, because they were going out afterwards, would drive to the game, and my father would sit in the stands, third base line, boom, and all of a sudden some guy starts. And you and he's, and I'm not going to use the language, but it wasn't pretty. And there's children in the stands. And my dad says, "You need to shut up." And this guy stands up. And here's what I think of him, and here's what I think of you. Here's what you're worth. And he takes out of his pocket a bunch of change, loose change, and throws it at your father. Now, your father has already made his way to,
At third base when he's coming in the dugout?
Your father already made his way to, your father was at third base. But it was, it wasn't Wrigley Field, so you could hear him. And your father now starts making his way towards this guy. That was the fact that back then your father was going after him. Well, your father wasn't quick enough. Let's not kid ourselves. Your father, I think the most bases he stole in 1 year was 6. So he wasn't real fleet of foot. My father got to this guy and did it because, for a number of reasons. You didn't want your father in the middle of the paper, and that was his goomba. That was his buddy. And my father took this guy and rung him up. He lit him up like the guy, this is where you sit there and say to yourself, I might have made a mistake here. Because he didn't know what the hell hit him. And my father made sure that Ron didn't have to do what needed to be done to this guy because this guy was bad. And that's how close that crystallized their relationship. And they did that more than once. They did that to each other more than once.
I noticed, and that was the time I remember because that was the time that Ernie, there's a picture of Ernie holding back my dad towards the stands. And you remember the Scottsdale Stadium, how small it was. A lot of that Scottsdale Stadium back then versus now, way different. A lot of retirees would go watch the Cubs play. It was an older crowd with younger kids that just wanted to see baseball players that lived in Arizona. They were there. And so you're right, it was a laid-back thing. And then this guy just starts going nuts, throwing change at my dad. Yeah, and that's where you're...
A lot of the Chicagoans, who moved to retire there, this was, they died and went to heaven to go see spring training. Right. Yeah, it was fun. I mean, we used to love going there. I mean, we didn't go to the games because we were kids. But my father and your father went everywhere together. And my father did, not that your father needed to be protected because your father was tough. He was
right,
one
but you
tough.
can't get
but
in trouble like that. He got in trouble with the time when me and Ronnie were walking where that guy, that beer vendor, was like 6'6", yelling about Don Young, and my dad threw him against the wall, and then the guy tried to sue him. It's like, the judge is like, well, you're 6'6", you're yelling at this guy? Back then they let that go, but you think about today, you can't get near it, so you need a guy to protect the guys who are out in public. But back then it wasn't that way. But your dad also did that at Wrigley a couple times. I remember, I think Billy or Ricky told me a story where, and I even remember hearing about it not too far after, but like there was a guy at third base again, and I think your dad just brought him, said, "Come with me down into the concession area," and that's it. Get out of the park, and then boom,
they'd be out to dinner at events. Your dad one time. Now my dad got into it with somebody. It had nothing to do with your father. Got into it, and your dad tapped my father. I'll take care of this, Gene. Your father grabbed the guy. He had his top coat on, lifted him up off the ground. His feet were. My father told us so. His feet were dangling. Hung him up on a coat hook that was up against the wall, and said, "You need to stay there for a while." The guy was hanging by his feet and just walked away. My father couldn't stop laughing. He said, "That's the easiest fight I've ever been in." That's a true story.
Buddy.
It's one banquet or someplace they were at. They used to ham and egg it real good together, Gene and Ron.
Oh, no doubt, man. Oh, God. I got to tell you, say he wasn't quick. He was quick on his feet. He just didn't have that sprint from first. He could, go to his right and left real quick, right? But couldn't.
Oh, yeah. No, he was like an alligator. He was like an alligator. For 20 feet, there was nobody faster. There was nobody faster. That's why he was such a... He was such a gifted third baseman. But I used to tell him, I said, now I know why we traded Lou Brock, because we got you.
And what was, the 69 season, what was that like for you that year?
I do remember the winter after when they used to do the benefits, the charity basketball games. Do you remember those?
Yeah, of course, yeah. We had all their jerseys, yeah, of course.
Yeah, at Holy Cross, because it's a Catholic school, and all those guys would show up. I mean, Ron, Fergie. Fergie was an All-American basketball player, or All-Canadian, I think.
Yep.
He was phenomenal.
Yep.
Do you remember, Jeffy, Vince Iduke?
Of course, yeah.
Vince Iduke was the Bobby Riggs. Yeah, he was the Bobby. He didn't play anything professionally, but he could golf. He could shoot pool. He was a hustler. And he was a hustler, totally. He used to play with the guys, with all the Cubs. And afterwards, they all stick around because they were great guys and sign autographs. Then we would have Ron Santo Baseball School. And guys would come up to your father and say, whose signature is this? Vince Iduke would sign Jesus Christ. because nobody knew who he was. And these guys, they say, Ron says, save that. One day that's going to be worth a lot of money.
Oh, Vince Iduch's signature?
He signed Jesus Christ.
What a name, too. Like Vince Iduch. I remember him, and he was a good-looking dude. Like, he almost seemed like a guy hanging out in a Rat Pack, right? Yeah. He would, like, hang out with – he seemed like a guy like – so he kind of found his way with your dad, Beck, and my dad, and was a good athlete, so he just fit in, right? It seemed like he was on a team. Yeah, there was some
when those guys
characters.
When those guys hit the West Coast and they got into that, what my recollection was, they would look up at the scoreboard. Now they're on the West Coast, and the Mets were on the East Coast, and the Mets games were already over. And the Mets started the streak, and they started winning, and the pressure hit the guys, and they're on the West Coast, and they're playing the Dodgers, and they're playing San Francisco, and now they've already given up a half a game because the Mets have won, and it got to them. And I remember that the losing streak was just bad, and we lost ground so quickly that you didn't realize it was happening, because there was no way with that team that anybody should have beat us. That's how good they were.
Yeah, I know.
Wasn't that the year that all four of those guys, the infielders, made the All-Star team? All five.
Yeah, they all played. Yeah, my dad and Kess were starting. They started. Then the rest of the guys they filled in. It was all the Cubs. At the infield for the All-Star team. Now, let me ask you this: that getting more of a serious kind of thing. What do you think '69 did to my dad? And I remember I found a gold chain or something that your dad said, "Oh, '69, you guys are going to win the World Championship." I mean, boy, it just changed so quickly. Did you sense the mood? Did you ever?
Yeah.
What'd you get from my dad and your dad on that? Yeah.
For the first time in my life, they lost the momentum that had given them. There was such a high that they were all riding on, and your father and my father especially. I mean, there was an energy, and they were two powerful guys and had a lot of pride. And the fact that slipped through their hands was devastating. It was devastating. Now, these guys, nothing's going to break them, but it broke them a little bit. It was a little bit difficult for them to manage. I know they certainly recovered because they were so resilient, but I do know that there was no way when you looked at the talent that was on that '69 team that we should have lost. And so it wasn't a level of arrogance or cockiness. It was the stark reality. These guys should have won it all. And when they got into that bad streak, and everybody hits a slump. I mean, it's just the stark reality. But they couldn't rebound from it. What it did to your father, I think it was very emotional. I think, and your father was, again, a powerful man, and to have that, to have to deal with, tough. And, you have to remember, too, because of the type of personality that he was a target. People would go after him. Either you loved him or you hated him. And the people that hated him, now it gave him something. It gave him something to go after him with. Yeah. Not that he couldn't handle it. He could, but it becomes, at times, overwhelming. Overwhelming. And he managed it well. But
did you remember any of the Don Young stuff there? Do you recall that at all? Because I know your dad went on a trip that you don't. Okay,
I don't remember.
He kind of kept that. He kept that down. He kept that low. I mean, he really kept that internally, and I think that was with that and everything that where the end of the season went. If you think about it, I mean, you know this. My dad was on the Cubs for 10 years. Billy was like 9, 10 together, and Ernie had 14 or 15 by then. I mean, they were really ready to win it, and that was the time. And I think you thought maybe in 1970 they can jump back, but they never quite did, right? And I think if they would have won in '69, boy, that changes a lot of lives. A lot of things.
Profoundly. Yeah, we all know now, and you can see it based on the way people respond. But your father had an impact on a lot of people's lives, and that wasn't lost by the fact that they didn't win the World Series.
Mm-hmm.
If they had won, he would have been a rock star at a rock star level. That's how much more it would have elevated him. And he was already elevated, but he would have been through the stratosphere. That's how popular he was. I mean,
I think more importantly, I think like anything for an athlete, you want to get to the top of your game. You want to win what you're fighting to win for the first time you even get into the bigs, right? Is win a World Series
ring. That's what you play for.
And especially the great players, that says something. Look at Michael Jordan, look at all of them. And not to get it, I knew that hit hard. And I think it hit hard for the family and everything to go in that. But I have to say one thing, that is the agony of defeat that they went through. They took it like, boy, they all took it, and they took it well as far as like how they still stayed together and how he had a fulfilling life all the way through, and broadcasting brought him back to another level. And it's, you look back at that and you go, wow, it did. Who knows what could have went on from there, but it did.
Yeah,
but you were right in the thick of it.
Yeah, the one thing that I do always say when I reflect back on it is I do, and my whole recollection is crystallized by the fact that he was still present first and foremost in everybody's life. Everybody still. You talk, my favorite Cub. And then the energy that he portrayed and projected when he was in the booth, I mean, that wasn't contrived. You don't make that stuff up. He was heartbroken. No. I mean, when they had the couple opportunities to do it again, similar to '69, and they didn't do it, he was in pain. The man was. I mean, it was terrible for him. Terrible.
Yeah. What did you think of Leo yourself, being around Leo?
Here's what I liked him. I liked him because he loved your father. He loved you. He respected your father and loved your father, and he gave your father a long rope to work with, a long leash, and that was a high level of respect from that man, and it was nice to see that was projected onto your father because he deserved it. I guess Joe Pepitone didn't like him. There were a couple.
Well, anything. When you don't win, it all kind of tumbles, right? I mean, at the end, it didn't end. It didn't end well for my dad and DeRocher's relationship too, right? Because he had that thing in the clubhouse for his day.
Right.
But overall, they win it that year with DeRocher. Then DeRocher's you looked at it a little differently. But
he's the Messiah.
It's just how it goes. It's baseball, right? A lot like life. It could switch on a dime. You don't even know it.
They used to come in the wintertime, all of them, to Holy Cross, because Coach Frank Mariani would open up he wouldn't tell anybody they were coming, and all of us baseball players, the juniors and the seniors, which I was one of, would meet them in the basketball court, and we'd hit in the batting cage, and I never forget the time Coach Frank said, "You catch Fergie." Well, he's loosened up. He says, I'm going to start throwing fast. He threw a fastball. I tell you, it fluttered like at one of our wiffle ball games in the back. I almost didn't catch it, and almost hit me square right between the eyes. And I got up and I said, "That's it. I'm not touching this guy." I thought I was a good athlete. He almost killed me. I mean, I don't know what. I said, "What did you?" I said, "You got to let me know when it's a." He said, "No, that's my fastball." He said, "That's my fastball." I said, "I'm done." I said, but they used to come to Holy Cross in the dead of winter,
right?
And that was unusual for professional athletes back then.
Right. And talk about that now. Like, so did you want to be a ball player because you grew up seeing that? What was your thoughts on everything?
Of course I did. I mean, I thought that your father at one point told me I had the hands and the bat speed. I didn't. I was a pretty big kid, but I didn't have that. I didn't have it. It's humbling. I got a scholarship to Wake Forest University, and I was pretty good in high school. I thought I was a lot better than I was, and
right.
You get to a whole different level, and you're not that good. You hope to become one, but you realize very quickly that you're not. I mean, these guys are just too good. They're just. Your father was not a dime a dozen. He was one in a million.
Yeah,
it was one in a million. No, your father could do everything: play golf, play football, play basketball, shoot pool, and ping pong. Whatever it was, there was nothing he couldn't do. There was nothing he couldn't do. I mean, because they were athletes.
Right. Did you tell me, like, was it Billy's graduation, your graduation, where all the guys showed up? Who showed up at that graduation?
Billy, I think, and again, I have to do a timeline on it. It was one of my brothers, one of the four of us, the older ones, graduations. And so we're at, I think it's the Hyatt House on River Road, in right just east of the airport. And we're sitting there and we're celebrating. And here comes Johnny Bench, your father, Beck. I forget Tony Perez, right? It wasn't Tony Perez, Cincinnati guy, right?
Yeah, right.
They come to there's all these kids at this graduation. Now Joe Pepitone was there. Now your father says, I need to go. I'm going to take a cab. We're going to go down because my father helped Joe Pepitone open up the bar on Rush Street. Remember Joe Pepitone's place? You remember that?
I do. I remember him having a place. Yeah, I was too young, but I remember him having a place. Yeah. So
I told Joe, I need to take a cab and get the Cadillac. Come on, jump. My dad gave me the keys. I drove them all down there. Who wouldn't want to do? I got Beckert, Santo, Bench, Tony Perez, and there was one. I think maybe Randy was there. I'm driving him down to Rush Street. You sure you can do this, kid? I said, yeah, it'll be just fine. It's not a problem. That's a true story. That's a true story.
That's crazy, man. That's
now, they didn't ask me to come in with them because I was only 16. But
think about that, man. That's something else. And I got to say that Holy Cross High School at the time, that really, I mean, Mariani, it just and the connection with my dad and your dad and all that, boy, that became a great place of just like, I mean, I remember just going to school a lot of times, like you said, for those basketball games and the camps.
Yeah.
It was that
your dad had the baseball camp there.
Yeah, what came through there. Yeah.
And he would come to the baseball camp before the games at Wrigley Field. And the kids died and went to heaven because Ron Santo would show up and help with instructions and how to field and how to hold the bat. You know, it was amazing. Just amazing. Some kids will never forget that. We didn't, whereas we didn't really get that impressed with stuff like that because we were always around it.
Exactly. Yeah. It was quite an environment, man. It's just so good talking to you. And how's life for you? Everything good? You're 70. You know, it's funny. I gotta say this. You're 70, and you're calling me still Jeffy, which I love, and I'm 60.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's who you are. And I have nothing. I told your mother the other day when I spoke to her, and this is a stark reality. I saw that special on your father, which I'd never seen before, and I watched the whole thing. There wasn't too much I didn't know, but again, your brother, your sister, and you were so polished. It comes as no surprise, but I was really pleasantly pleased with how well you guys handled yourselves. You were polished, you were poised. You guys were really, I was very impressed. And again, that doesn't come as a surprise, but.
Yeah, that was a nice piece they did. MLB did it, Marquee Network, and they came to me. And at first I'm like, what are you doing with this old Cub? You know, we did a documentary, but then when they made it more like it's the family perspective, you know, the kid, I'm like, okay, that works. You know, and it turned out nice. It was nice. It was nice to do that. You know, when he's not here anymore and you're going to do something on him, well, you got to have the family to talk for him what's real. Yeah. And that was nice that we were part of that. But yeah, man, it's been. Can you believe it's been? You know, God, so long for both of our dads.
It's been 65 years of my life with the Santos. Yeah. 65 years of my life, and it continued with. Yeah, even though we have families too. You know, you have a wife. By the way, tell Chris I said hi.
I definitely will.
You know, you have nephews, and you know, we have other things that occupy our times. I have grandchildren now, but you can't take away the memories. And we have. Can I tell you one other story?
Yeah,
we
please.
were at my brother Billy's first wife died, and so it's cousin Jay Mayer, me, Billy, Ricky, Eugene, Karen Benelli, Debbie Benelli. We're sitting around a table, and we're at the Glenview House. Remember the Glenview House?
Oh, come on. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay, so we're at Debbie Benelli's daughter, Jennifer, works there. So we have the after party from the ceremony of Billy's wife who passed away, and we get up to one of these big, long, rectangular tables, and the people I just mentioned are sitting around telling stories, and we're all of a sudden I look up, and everybody that was we were upstairs. Everybody that was at the ceremony has made a circle around us, sitting around this table, listening to these stories. And they're just sitting there with their jaws down by their ankles. The stories about your father, my father, Glenn Becker, just about the old days. And I finally, one kid says, "This can't be true." I said, "Listen, we're only telling you half the truth. We can't tell you the whole truth because you can't handle it. You wouldn't be able to handle it." I said it again. We had nothing to do with it. This was our parents and Ron. These are just things that we have. We were fortunate enough to observe it. Don't give us credit for it. We're just telling the story. But these are true stories, and that's how it was. That's how magical that time was.
Yeah, I got to say, you talk about my dad, and that's beautiful. And I got to say, back to the Pullanos, having that energy growing up in the families and the extended families, like you said, the Mayers and the Benellis and and the Matarices, it was something. And it just goes to show you, man, when there's a lot of love, you just feel right, like you exist. Yeah. When that love kind of goes away, it gets hard, man, and you got to get it back. But it just shows that love is the key, man. And I think that's the main thing that was always with us: love and laughter. And we had a ball, man, and we cared for each other. I want to say this now.
Love you, man. I really love you.
You and your whole family, every one of you guys meant so much to us. And so calling you, and I'm going to call Michael in the next month or so, get him on. So I got the 4 guys that I really, looked up to. And but you made it special, man. And it's just great to talk to you. Great that you're doing great. You're 70 now. I can't believe it. I'm 60. It still feels like we're young, right? Because we have such big fathers. It's like we never grow old,
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Well, I tell you, and I say this without question. I tell your mother, and used to tell my mother all the time, being the oldest child of Gene and Mary Louise Pullano is as good as it gets. And I couple that with the fact that I spent my life with Judy and Ron. I wouldn't trade. If there's such a thing as reincarnation, I'm coming back as myself. Not that I'm anything special, but the fact that, because I'm not. I used to think I was, but I'm not. But I have to tell you this, being plopped into that lifestyle because of those 4 people, I'm a lucky man. So I love you. Yeah. Tell everybody I said hi, too, and we'll talk soon.
We'll talk soon. Oh, thanks for being on. All right. Love you, pal. All right.
Bye-bye.
See you, man. Thanks for listening to our show. And by the way, we have a new crackerjack. Woo-hoo! Liz Rutherford.
Thank you, Liz.
Liz, way to go, Liz. Thank you. Welcome to the Cool Crackerjack team.
I think it's a Cool Crackerjack Club. Let's
Oh, I like that better.
Yeah, it's
Cool Crackerjack Club. There you go. Right? CCC. CCC. So you are now a member of the club with these Cool Crackerjacks. Special thanks to Scott Nelson, Jim McCauley, Debbie Foley, Sherry Matarisi, Terry O'Brien, Gary Tallman, Anne-Marie Pascule, Jim Muleschlegel, and Liz Rutherford.
Isn't that great? After I don't know how many shows now, Jim Muleschlegel has been on the show, but now you're
I got his name down.
You got his name down now.
This is like Jim Mule. Yeah, that's Jim Mule. Now
in the beginning, we had several retakes.
Retakes on that, but now it's easy. It's Jim Muleschlegel.
This show is made possible because of all of them and all of our subscribers.
All of them.
All of them, because we do have the Popular Peanuts and we have the subscribers on Apple that we don't know of. We don't have any names for them. So they're just subscribing in silence.
Hello.
And thank you for all of your subscriptions. And if you want to support the show and be a cool crackerjack yourself, subscribe on our Patreon page, click the link below this episode, or go to the Patreon tab on our website at www.peanutspopcornandcrackerjacks.com. You can also subscribe on Apple Podcasts.
Yes. And remember to click the follow button for the next episode and leave a review. Apple Podcast or Spotify.
And don't hesitate to write, give us suggestions, tell us how you're liking the show. Email jeff.ppcpodcast@gmail.com.
Yeah, suggestions. Put them in. For my closing quote, it's not...
Hold on, we got a delivery. Moxie's going nuts.
Moxie, stay. Stay. I got a closing quote, Moxie. Stay. Okay. For my closing quote, it's not the will to win that matters. Everyone has that. It's the will to prepare to win that matters. Paul Bear Bryant.
Toodaloo!
SantoFilms.com, the place to buy This Old Cub DVDs, posters, and This Old Cub t-shirts. Get yourself one now at SantoFilms.com.